This is F.D. Recovery, where we interview addicts and alcoholics.
Our aim is that through this podcast, we might help you on your journey of recovery.
Thank you for listening.
Hello, this is Frank with F.D. Recovery, and you're listening to the Weekly Intention. So we go week to week on a topic and our spiritual principle, and we work it in our recovery and in our lives. So last week was comparison is the thief of joy. We'll talk about how it kind of related to our life and our recovery, and then we'll move on to this week's is perspective. The doors of perception, right? But perspective, because there's a difference. Perception and perspective are different. Once we learn that, we can start realizing what's going on around us. But before we dive into that, we'll talk about comparison being the thief of joy. So this week, it was a fun week. I ended up going up to Sierra City towards the end of my week and working up there at Bassett Station. So they needed an on-site manager, and I was willing to help them out, and they were willing to let me help them. They had a good time with their wedding for their daughter, and I was able to be of service and, also get paid too. So it was a very awesome experience, but so I had a good week, and I hope your guys' week was good too. So comparison being the thief of joy, right? The one thing that pops out to me when I think about comparison is the lack of gratitude, right? It's just not being grateful for kind of what you have and what's in your life, and just kind of always wanting, right? That's why it's very, very important that I want for nothing, right? Because don't get me wrong, it still comes along. We have those human urges, and we have to deal with this thing called life, where things just kind of happen and we can't really control it, but we do our best to work these spiritual principles to overcome the things that kind of come up and like naturally, right? We work through a lot of trauma, we work through a lot of hiccups, and life comes on life terms, and people are crazy. Sometimes we are. So, comparison comes along, and sometimes we can get envious and jealous and all these things. And it's very important for me, like throughout this week, that I just get back to the basics and look at my life and realize what I got in it and all the good, right? Because, it's super easy to look on to anything and be like, that's what I want. And, it's really the wanting that I realize I'm more addicted to than anything. We're in either a state of wanting and then getting, and then kind of just being like, oh, I got it, right? And then just looking for another want, to kind of, because we're in a perpetual state of craving or wanting, right? So that's just something that I noticed this last week is addressing the cravings, the envy, the jealousy, and without getting too far into the weeds, that's basically how my week went, right? Just be careful, right? Because sometimes we can get a little bit off task and start looking at other people's lives like ours isn't important. And then we do ourselves an incredible disservice when we start not being appreciative and not connecting and being present in our own lives, what can be very easy because life throws a lot at you. You can work a lot of hours, and and sometimes you don't got the time to either be with your family or to do the things you love. But also, going back to that spiritual principle of priorities is very important to recalibrate that, we reevaluate those things, and and it's very important that we do it with the sponsor and see where we might be lacking, right? And being in a continuous state of unsatisfactory is just not something that's contingent in this spiritual life for a positive future, right? We get what we get in this life of recovery because when you start walking this path, it's like you get the fruit of your labor, right? You get the result of your continuous habit and choices that you either do over a span of years, day to day, right? We're the product of our daily rituals. So it's super important if you're kind of not digging where you're at, it's you need to reevaluate your daily routine, your morning routines, your everything you got going on in your life. See the people you got hanging out with, because that it's all your fault, right? And there's a lot of things. There's some things that pop up in our life that definitely isn't ideal, right? This, sometimes there can be a sense of victimhood, and even when you are a true victim of some sort of crime, you still have agency whether you take on that role, because everything is just a perception kind of game, right? Where we perceive things, right? And that kind of gives us a good segue into perspective. And the difference between perception and perspective, we'll kind of ask ChatGPT. And perspective is a particular viewpoint or angle from which you consider something, right? And perception is how you interpret or become aware of something through your senses, thoughts, and experiences. Don't get me wrong, right? So basically my brain breaks it down as perception is what I'm, how I see, right? Just the physical act, being able with vision, right? And perception is the thoughts and beliefs of the viewpoints behind that perception, right? So it's very important that we start looking at how we see things, because and also right size our mind when we decide to look at these important things in our life, or we decide to look at a situation or a person, whatever we find ourselves contemplating in our life. And it's very important that we clean our perspective, because what happens is, for me, and I'll speak in I statements, but I know everything is very relatable just as human beings, and everybody likes to think they're so freaking unique. And I know I do. And I'm speaking from the I position, where I'm like, I think I'm like super unique, and I get this big head about myself, and understanding that most everything that I'm feeling inside is, if there's a definition for it, somebody has experienced it, and most likely somebody's experiencing that now somewhere in this world, right? So to think that there's nothing, the old saying, there's nothing new under the sun, right? It's very important that we get back to that baseline of cleaning our perspective and understanding that honestly, sometimes our perspective isn't real. There's been so many times, whether it was some sort of drug-induced schizophrenia, like where I was really out on the limb on some thought patterns, and the FBI and CIA and all these things were happening. And when it boiled down to it, I was just a no good drug addict just waiting to get arrested. And it's, and I don't say that negatively, I just say that truthfully. But, getting to this point where I start realizing, like, nothing's happening to me. I'm controlling it all through my perspective, right? There's things that happen. People do things. People do stupid shit all the time. But I get it. I had the final say on how I look at it and how I experience it. Don't get me wrong. There's immediate stuff that kind of you have to work through, like feelings that necessarily, like when feelings come for me, I can't necessarily control them. I mean, control the initial experience of it. Like when I'm angry, like I gotta feel it and let it go, right? It's not, it happened. Whether it controls me is different. That's a whole different ball game. There was a time in my life where I was just so explosive and uncontrollable, where I'd find myself in a jail cell due to my actions, right? And I would just act like some sort of victim, like I had this blind rage and something took over me, and just zero accountability in the game. And getting to a point now, like understanding that you have control over this, but there's pressure points before that experience that need to be addressed, right? I didn't realize those daily, those daily workings and working on myself and crafting this man that I am today is, in that moment of extreme stress, I was unable to make the correct choices because I didn't have the backbone and experience and the habits in place to allow me to make the best choices possible. So I was just completely undisciplined. I was running around with the big old noggin full of bullshit and looking at everything the wrong way. Selfish me, right? And on top of that, sprinkle meth and a whole bunch of other drugs into it and put it in a needle, and then you go, and then you have it, right? And so when we talk about perspective and we talk about trying to gain a little bit of perspective and insight on how the world goes in our brain, it's very important that we start addressing this whole assets and liabilities, and especially those steps, guys. I mean, if you're not in constant inventory, if you're not constantly doing the check and balances with yourself spiritually, you're gonna do more harm than good, right? You're gonna do yourself a disservice. I know that from firsthand experience. When I was 2 years clean and sober, and I know I've said this before, but finding myself in a jail cell due to my anger and passing that, that fork in the road where I realized something needed to change, and I can't hold on to this blind childish rage that I allowed to control me. And once I started realizing that I need to start doing the necessary steps, the day-to-day input of my structured disciplines that help me get to that place, meaning dig deep, clean, get with the sponsor, work the steps, make your amends, start cleaning this shit out. Your mom, your dad, you got to address it all, right? The trauma, the things that happened as a kid, all these things that are hanging around in your spirit and bogging you down, and all that stuff you've done in your life that perpetuated from all those bad experiences that you say, well, I did this because of that, right? You can start letting those go, and you can start reframing your perspective, and it's very key that we start understanding that we have more agency than we know. And when you start, like for me, like now I'm in a whole different era of my life where I'm in my branded era, right? Where I'm starting to like make sense of my own name, make sense of my own identity, and I'm starting to kind of live up to the man that I know I am, and not be full of shit, and not wondering, and not letting little things shake me and get me into the guessing game, and kind of stand firm about what I am and what I'm trying to achieve, right? Don't get me wrong, we got to stay fluid, and we got to stay adaptable, because that's what spirituality and being a kind, loving, do better person, right? And it's not always a success, right? There's plenty of times where I want to rip someone's head off, but the key thing is having that, having the ability to get out of that pocket, right? Having that ability to want to rip someone's head off, but understanding that I have to implement these tools and these spiritual principles just to get out of that mess, right? And find a solution, some conflict resolution, right? Because we can do all the, there was an experience in a tea house one time, and I was just starting to get my bearings, and I saw somebody that was a little farther behind me as far as the anger, and because we're sometimes quicker, sometimes slower, but we all have different rates of recovery. But when you watch somebody struggle with the same thing that either you have overcome, or at least overcome in a certain phase, right? Because you can still deal with anger, but there's different layers to it. Where I was bad before, I'm less bad, bad wording, but I'm a little less so, and I'm a little more so controlled, and then I stub my toe or whatever else kind of comes up, and there's just different layers to the madness. It's so for me, like what used to piss me off isn't the same what it used to piss me off 5 years ago. It's a little different now, and the reaction is not an explosive burn my life down and hurt everybody in the process. It's more of, oh, wow, this is new. I'm mad at this. Let's see how we can transfer this energy and try to get over this, right? Sometimes you have to sit in that madness before it hurts too much. Once it starts hurting a little bit too much, doesn't mean you'll change, but all your bells and whistles will go off and it'll be uncomfortable. So if you're in this process and you're trying to change and you're trying to live a right life, all those bells and whistles are trying to tell you something. And if you're doing some of the work, you realize that that's God's messaging. That's God saying, hey, here's these alarms. Listen to it. Please, please, please. Right? So that's where I'm at with this whole perspective game. It's not what you're seeing. It's how you see it. You can't change what you're seeing, but you can change how you see it. Right? The letter 1 is always going to be the letter 1. But we could all share a perspective, but the interpretation behind it is vastly different. Someone could be like, I only have one. And if somebody goes, man, I have one, that's awesome. So just changing that perspective behind it is so key. You want to find and I'm not, it's not like I'm jumping on here and go, okay, guys, yep, it's all about perspective. If you can get this and everything will click. No, it takes fucking work, right? It takes steamable acts to get some self-esteem. It takes you doing some good in this world to feel good about yourself. It takes you to take care of yourself to start feeling good about everything. Eat right. I was feeding my body poison constantly, and I was wondering why I had a bad freaking attitude. It's because it all freaking matters. It's the broken window effect, right? It's a broken window theory. The psychology behind the broken window theory is if there's a broken window, then who's in charge? Nobody's taking agency. Why isn't that fixed? And how long is it broken for? Because how you do one thing is how you do many, right? So it's very important that that you pay attention to this stuff, because that broken window turns into not taking out the trash, turns into not cleaning up after yourself, turns into this and that, and it's the broken window effect, right? So we gotta really pay attention to our perspective and how we're looking at it. It's going back to that number 1, right? I have one. I only have one, versus I have one. This is fucking awesome. I can't believe I've never had one before, and I'm going to be grateful that I have one. Versus, I only have one. Are you kidding me? Right? You see the just hearing it, right? The empowerment in one and disenfranchise in the other, like you're some sort of victim. One person, like I'm only speaking from experience, man. This is straight up with things I went through. I'm like, holy crap. I remember I used to be that guy. I only have one. This is BS. And then all of a sudden, when I lost it all and got humbled into the ground and ground into the dirt many, many times, I started realizing, going, after all that, oh my God, thank you. I have one. It matters now to me, because I know what it's like to be, put myself in some serious pain and be that ungrateful, blah, 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 and just being so negative about everything, and just realizing, oh my God, I did it to myself the whole time, right? And it's just a unique experience to go through all this. And also you got to understand, like, just because, you get all these fancy tools and you hear all this stuff doesn't mean it's all about if you apply them or not. You got to apply some of this stuff you hear. If you're on, listening to a recovery podcast, it's because you're obviously looking for some change or some enhancements with your life. And maybe you can pick up something from somewhere, right? We're not just doing this stuff because I got to throw this in my headphones to pass the time. Like, our spirit is looking for something, right? So it's very important that we absorb all this and start utilizing these tools, right? So start with reframing your perspective. That's one thing that I'm going to work on this week, is just paying attention to how I'm seeing it. Not what I'm seeing, it's how I'm seeing it. Like just stop looking at it on a surface level and start looking on a deep level and go, hey man, how am I interacting with this experience? How am I seeing this person, this thing, this feeling? How am I, what am I doing to it that's causing so much friction? Or even on the opposite end, it doesn't have to all be negative. Like, man, I'm looking at this pretty good, man. I'm enjoying this, and giving yourself props for when you look at things the right way, when it empowers you and it empowers others. Usually it's everybody's stoked, right? When something's good in your life and it's empowering to you, and it's usually good to others. And if it's not good for others, then it's something you need to evaluate, because we're all interconnected, and the things I'm doing for myself in private when I'm working on my spiritual well-being, it should be a benefit to others. If it's not, then I have to look at it and see where I got selfish along the way. So this week it's all about perspective, baby. Let's see how you're seeing, right? Let's look at especially try to work on that positivity. Maybe that will be maybe that will be the intention next week. Positivity, right? We'll talk a little bit about that if I haven't already done it. I got to look at the list, right? So I love you guys. This is Frank from F.D. Recovery, and this week's weekly intention is perspective. I love you guys. We out. Peace.
Thank you for tuning in to FD Recovery. A reminder, be kind to yourself on this journey of recovery. Also, call your sponsor, get connected to local support groups, and for one day at a time, stay clean and sober.